by reading something on a shepherd, just because that's the first book. And oddly enough, I'm going to read the prologue first. And the reason the prologue is kind of important to this book is because it really kind of sets where the world is, because it's not today's world exactly. So, when there is a significant decrease on the world's food supply, the situation leads inevitably to turmoil and conflict. In one possible future, this shortage has left millions of people without enough food to survive. Those without sustenance, the poor and the disadvantaged, have rioted in protest, and their violent search for food has spilled across international borders. Marauding hands have pillaged through the countryside, hungry for even meager foodstuffs. Old hatreds have resurfaced, border skirmishes have increased, and world stability is threatened. The oceans, once an abundant source of food, have been overfished, and now only the wealthy can afford seafood. But mankind, ever ingenious, has resorted to radical science to solve the food supply problem and return the oceans to productive aquaculture. Bioengineered mermen and merwomen, known as shepherds, aided by trained dolphins, herd huge schools of re-engineered tuna at the whim of multinational seafood corporations. Held by those companies in indentured servitude, these much maligned cowboys live aboard submersible rafts in areas of the open ocean allocated to them by international agreements. Further complicating matters, the partitioning of the ocean into ranches has severely limited the ability of independent fishermen to make a living. Those that continue to fish legally have banded together to fight for their rights utilizing the world courts. Other fishermen have found more lucrative, though less honorable work. Desperate men do desperate things, and the oceans are now filled with treachery, pirating, and worse. And the reason I felt it was important to put that in there is because it would be very hard to work all that into as a background, and most of it you probably wouldn't even want to read if it was in the bulk of the story. But it explains why later on you hear things about, like one of the main characters, Toivo, is a Finnish fisherman, whereas Olga, who's one of the other main characters, she actually is Russian. No, I didn't steal that from her. But because at the time, and also partly because of family history, Toivo doesn't want to have anything to do with Russians, and yet he ends up, thrown in with Olga, and he has to settle in his own mind that, hey, she is who she is, and being a Russian is not always bad. There's good Russians too, and she must be one of them. So, anyway, I'm going to just read then, this is the very opening section about Olga. Olga belonged to the sea. It owned her as surely as solid ground owned the rest of humanity. On land, the lubbers ridiculed her and called her an abomination, an ugly thing born in a devil's laboratory. But here, swimming in the vast Pacific, her body was beautiful, with a grace no lubber could match. She drifted along peacefully, cradled by the warm water. The rocking caress of the gentle swells brought a sense of comfort, of belonging, of home. She pulled hard, breaststroking with webbed hands, and shot ahead, rolling over on her back to look up at the dark vault of the night sky. Off to the east, the pre-dawn glow hung at the horizon so that overhead only the brightest stars were still visible in the gray that preceded sunrise. She glided backward through the tranquil swells, listening to the dolphins blow and dive as somewhere ahead they circled the tuna herd like sheepdogs. 20 meters behind her, she could see the red, green, and white running lights of the submersible raft Homestead cruising on autopilot. She took another long, strong stroke, her hands pushing the water backward towards her feet so hard that miniature whirlpools swirled in her wake. The momentum carried her over the next swell and down into the falling trough, gliding like a shadow in the feeble light through the dark gray water. She slid her hands down her lean, graceful sides, feeling the smooth tan skin that would never wrinkle no matter how long she stayed in the water. That's just, and it goes back to one of the things I said earlier about I like books where you care about the characters. So to me, most of my work, I try to introduce the character and get you to buy into the character early on. Some people will tell you that's probably not the best hook because a lot of murder mysteries start with the body is right on page 1, and in my case, the first body in this book comes about chapter 3. So you get to know the characters a little first, and then find out what happens to them, and hopefully by then you care what happens to them. So, does anybody have a one of the books they would like to hear something from? Because if not, I'll just pick one.
I wanted to hear something from Shepard's. I mean, you already taken care of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. But yeah. Thank you. So now, in this book, I guess I'll read just a little bit from chapter 1. But in this book, instead of bringing out the shepherds or the good guy, I actually introduced the slave trader first. So we get to meet him and find out what he's all about. So I'll read just a little bit of that. But Manohar Kalparmit stood in the pilot house of his rusty ship, a venerable tramp steamer that had served him well over the 8 years that he'd owned her. His black shoulder-length hair was ruffled and uncombed. His brown eyes, red from lack of sleep, were widely spaced in a brown face weathered by the wind, sun, and salt spray. His life hadn't been easy, but it was a life he chose to escape the abject poverty that engulfed so many in his country. That what he did brought suffering to others hardly concerned him. He made a living, and that was all that mattered. Manohar watched his crew help unload the cargo using the boom that swung on the midship's mast. 2 20-foot shipping containers held the captives they'd managed to snare, women and girls in one, men and boys in the other. The giant bins were hoisted from the forward hold and gently deposited on the waiting flatbed truck. Neither were very full. It wasn't his best trip. For the first time in a long while, they'd met with armed resistance from the backward villagers who were usually easy targets. Things were getting tougher, and this time most of the men they'd managed to catch were older, skinny, and would not bring a good price. There were a few young girls who would bring extra cash, but only a couple. The women he'd managed to round up were scullery maids, no more, no less, and wouldn't fetch a good price either. Still, he would collect payment and try to learn what went wrong this time and improve. As the targets got smarter, he had to get smarter too. He hoped that his next trip would be better. So, then in the second chapter, again I more introduced one of the swimmers or one of the shepherds, but it's a lot about the same. If you read Shepherds, that would seem very familiar to you. If I can find, there's one interesting thing that I have to find it. But in this book, the main shepherd, Olga, is pregnant and she's about to give birth in the midst of, they have to rescue their friend who's been kidnapped. And so I do a section in here, I'm trying to think of where it is. It's further back, where I wanted to do a water birth because they're in the middle of the ocean, and of course she swims really good, so I thought, well, that will work good. But I don't really know anything about water births, and so I had to talk to a few people that are, do birthing, and in fact, the one midwife had done some water births, and I got a little bit of tips from her, but then after I'd written the passage, yeah, why don't you hunt for that? But anyway, I'll just read a little bit of it. But then after I'd written it, I thought, I can't just put this out. I got to actually have somebody. So it turns out that one of our daughters who works at a hospital knows a gynecologist. And so I gave them the passage, and he read it, and he had his PA that works with him read it, and they both told me, you're okay. It's believable, it works good. And I was like, because I didn't want to have to redo all that. Okay. While she's finding that, how much time I got left?
What?
Oh, okay. I was going to read one section that I like out of the last book, Key to Tiramfall. Again, it's about the two women, one who was born in evil as demon spawn without knowing that, and then the other woman who was put in her place and kept being told that. But so Gwen, who's the one that was kidnapped and raised by a good family, her and her brother, she sets off to go find how to break into the Tiramfall Tower. And so this is a little bit about on their way to try to get there. This is what happens. The current dragged him under again. His lungs screamed for air. In the blackness, he lost his sense of direction. Which way was up? And then his foot struck a sunken boulder. Instinctively, he pushed off and shot upward. His head broached the surface. In the starlight, he could make out the darker outline of the shore. With windmilling strokes, he thrashed towards the looming outline of the bank. Ahead, the branches of a fallen tree stretched out from the shore, black fingers reaching toward him in the night. Twigs poked him in the chest as he grabbed for them. His hand slipped once and the current pushed him along. He bounced off a thicker limb, felt it slipping past, and then caught hold of another stout limb, clinging to it with all his strength. He hung on, catching his breath. He'd lost sight of his sister. Where was she? In the darkness, he had little hope of spotting her. "Gwen," he shouted, his voice quailed. "I'm here." It was her voice in his head. Earlier on in the book, they do some telepathic communication, so this is not like it felt close, but there was no way to know for sure. "Where?" "Hold on, I'll get you. We'll be safe in a minute." Seth tried to calm his ragged breathing, all the while clutching desperately to the branch. The current tugged at his body, trying to rip him from his tenuous perch. And then something nudged him. It was not his sister. It was the thick coils of a huge snake wrapped around his waist, enfolding him in powerful loops. He tried to pull away, terrified, but instead of squeezing the life out of him, the serpent began pulling him toward the shore. "Help," yelled Seth, struggling to reach Valorius, which is the name of his sword that he carries. "I'm being attacked." The snake pulled harder, breaking Seth's grip on the branch. It swam toward shore, dragging Seth along with it. Instead of crushing Seth in its powerful claws, the creature pulled him up on the weedy shore and released him. "Stop struggling." It was Gwen's voice in his head again, but she was nowhere to be seen. "It's me, you idiot." Seth pulled Valerius and raised it overhead, determined to kill the huge snake. Before he could strike, he noticed that the snake had some kind of satchel tied around its neck. His mind skipped a beat, and in that moment the serpent slithered out of reach. And there in the darkness, the twisting coiled shape wavered and shimmered, and right before Seth's eyes, it became a naked woman. Not just any woman, it was Gwen. She stood up, straightened the sack looped around her neck, ran her fingers through her sopping hair, and came over and sat down at his feet. Holy dragon dung, who are you? Asked Seth, unable to believe what he was seeing. Does Eric know who you talk like that? Well, by the way, that's the name of a dragon, so it makes sense to you. Seth slipped Valorius back into the scabbard and sat down with a thump. No, probably not, but I can't believe you. You can turn into a snake? When did you learn that spell? Gwen leaned over and kissed Seth on the cheek. It isn't a spell, it's just something I do. I don't know how I do it, I just do. I think it's like your ability to charm women. Seth shivered, all too aware of her bare flesh pressed next to him. Really? How long have you known that? Now Gwen laughed. Since we were kids. I thought you knew and we're just playing along. Remember when we played hide and seek and you couldn't find me? Seth paused. He did remember times when she had been impossible to find. And also remembered the big black snake that was always hanging around at the same time. You? That's right. I hid in plain sight. I can't believe you didn't know I was a snake. I guess you know now. Seth shook his head. Things were crazy, and not just whatever was going on with the River King. His little sister could change into a snake? Oh, that's hard to believe. So, that's just a piece of little different twist on your sister. Okay, so this is where I'm on very shaky ground when I wrote this, but fortunately I guess it passed muster. Olga took a deep breath and through gritted teeth she groaned, I don't know how much longer I can wait. This baby is coming and I can't stop it. All right, said Toivo, pulling off his shirt and boots. Without hesitation, he climbed over the railing and dropped unceremoniously into the sea, far enough from Olga so that he didn't splash her unnecessarily. The female dolphins created an opening for him as he swam to her side. I'm here, he said, sliding one arm under her shoulders. He noticed how easily her webbed feet kept her steadily floating at the surface, her belly half out of the water. Hell, he thought, she really is more at home here than on the ship. Olga glanced at him, a weak smile flirting with her lips before the pain washed it away. You have to be ready to take the baby once it's born. The raft appeared around the bow of the ship, two crewmen paddling fiercely toward Toivo. Buck was back at the railing on the stern, leaning over. What else do you need? I don't know, towels, clean towels, length of net, repair twine, or I guess, how should I know? I've never done this before. Fresh water probably too. The raft eased up alongside Toivo and he scrambled in. Again, the female dolphins repositioned themselves so the raft could safely glide up next to Olga. Is this going to work? Toivo asked Helga. Helga's actually one of the dolphins. I mentioned that Toivo can speak to them in their language. Sure, she answered. We always have our young this way. Yes, but the breathing, what about that? Just get the baby's head above water as soon as you can. The cord of life should provide substance until it is severed. The umbilical cord, thought Toivo, but there could be complications. Never having seen a baby born, Toivo's fear filled his mind with dangers. What if the cord broke early or was twisted and stopped delivering blood to his child, or the baby opens its mouth right away? Oxygen starvation could cause brain damage. He tried to put those thoughts out of his mind, concentrate on what was about to happen. Olga would have to be held up enough so that the baby was delivered. Its head remained out of the water until it was completely out and the cord tied off. Can you lift Olga's body enough out of the water so the baby will be born in air? Asked Toivo. We can, assured Helga, and the three dolphins pivoted and brought their powerful backs up under Olga's legs and bottom until the woman was angled up out of the water. They turned her so that she could put her feet on the side of the raft with her legs spread. Toivo leaned over and unexpectedly caught sight of the birthing canal, his face red and embarrassed to be staring directly at Olga's crotch. He blinked away the image and instead concentrated on Olga's webbed feet, gently rubbing them. He loved her feet and her webbed hands. In fact, he loved everything about his unique wife, despite the slurs that other fishermen had cast at the shepherds. Now he prayed that his child would be born safely and healthily. He didn't really care what it looked like, but a part of him hoped the baby would be more like its mother than like him. This was the first lubber cowboy baby, so there was no telling which genes would dominate. well, and then it goes on from there, but, so they have a successful birth. Okay, any questions? Anything else?
I'd like for you to read a passage of your best-selling novel at Spine.
Oh, sure.
That's sold out.
Okay.
And just a little piece of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
And then we can wrap it up if you'd like.
I had something picked out from that book, so
Great.
I will do that. This is this is early on. The main character, Gant, he ends up in a conflict. Now just to give a background before I read the section that I had here. He's a commoner who really wants to be a swordsman, but in their society, commoners do not be swordsmen. He's not supposed to learn. But it's a little complicated because his mother is cousin to the king, but she married a commoner, so they're considered commoners, but his uncle is one of the best swordsmen in the realm, and so secretly he was getting trained illegally, if you will, which was all fine until he runs into a conflict with one of the nobleman's sons, and they have a little, not fisticuffs, but swordcuffs, I guess. Although Gant doesn't have a real sword, he only has a stick, but he ends up breaking this guy's arm, and now he has a price on his head, so he is running away from home because he's a commoner, and he struck a nobleman, and that's just, you don't do that. So now he's on the road trying to get out of town, and that's where he picked up the story. So around the bend came a single shadowy figure on horseback. As the rider thundered closer, Gant's hand went to his sword, which he does have a sword that he had hidden, and he took it, obviously, since he's running away, he took it with him. So he actually has a real sword now. A horseman at this time of night was unlikely to be an innocent traveler. The figure moved closer, and Gant recognized Wendler's shadowy outline. That's the nobleman that he's already had the conflict with. Approaching cautiously, Wendler slowed his gray warhorse and set it prancing sideways toward the pair. A great shield painted with King Tyrdamus' emblem hung from a loop at the rear of the saddle, protecting Wendler's side. One arm was in a sling, the other held a heavy sword, one Gant recognized as his father's work. Wendler wore serviceable chainmail armor that showed signs of use. Wendler wasn't wearing a helm, and Gant wondered if he would risk combat without it. Nonetheless, Gant had his sword out. "Stay behind me," he whispered, and shoved Chams back with his free hand. That's his friend. Chams is his friend that went with him. "Hey, Wendler," shouted Chams over Gant's shoulder. "Come for the rest of the beating you should have gotten before?" "Chams, shut up," hissed Gant, staying focused on the advancing swordsman. "What do you want?" he demanded, warily eyeing the horse. Fighting Wendler was one thing, bringing down a horse to do it another. "Your head on a pike. The king's a gutless excuse for a ruler. His soldiers are slower than dead men. They should have run you down at full gallop and then beheaded you in front of your less than noble mother and father. You think you can do it for him?" Adrenaline rushed through Gant until his fingers shook. Chams stepped back. Good, thought Gant. Glad Chams wouldn't get caught in the middle. Maybe I just wanted to make sure you left town like a good little boy. That stung. Wendler was 2 years older and always gotten away with calling Gant little boy in Urik's classroom, though not when Urik could hear. Rage burned in Gant. He controlled it. Being an outlaw was bad enough. He did not want to add murder to the charges. "I broke your arm with a stick, and this isn't a stick," said Gant, pointing his sword at Wendler. "No, but it doesn't really matter. Netherdorf will soon have a new king, and I'll be a knight. You'll be an outlaw with a price on your head, and I'll come to collect." With that, Wendler reined his horse closer. He leaned forward and spit at Gant. Gant dodged it easily. Wendler circled, dug his spurs into his horse's flanks, and galloped back towards Netherdorf. Gant and Chams watched him disappear in the swirling fog. Chams turned toward Gant. "What do you think he meant?" "I don't know unless his father is stirring up the nobles against the king." Do you think he could get enough support to depose King Kirmes? Gant thought about it. I don't know. Between your uncle and mother, don't they have enough noble friends to stop Wendler's father? I think the kid should just recognize your nobility and be done with it. It's not that easy. There would be plenty of opposition to allowing every half-noble kid to have nobility status. Think about it. A look of mischief crossed James's face. Yeah, every bastard in the castle is probably half noble. Too many of the nobles can't keep their hands off the maids. I hope this doesn't bring on a civil war, added Gant.